I stretched and looked at the beach. Chumphon, Thailand. Who would have thought, I thought. 8 years have passed since we arrived here, and I drowned my phone, and with it my old life, in the crystal clear waters. I felt bad that I had polluted the bay where we now lived. So the next day I went back and pulled out the phone and then buried it in the ground. It was a more fitting end to my 7-year fictitious marriage. We have a 4,000 square foot house on the beach. In Thailand, you cannot own land, but you can own a house if the property is registered to a shell company. Strange, right? I hired a former Thai Army commando and his wife to look after the house and look after the three of us. Arun Salem and his wife Lamai were in their early 50s and were simply perfect. My children accepted them as family and soon began calling them grandparents. In turn, they loved my daughters as if they were their own. They had no children of their own and lived in a small bungalow attached to the main house through a covered walkway. Arun was injured by illicit substance smugglers and retired with a small pension. They were a real blessing. I was worried about Lucy and Jane, or Lily and Riley as they were called before. The children had a very difficult time at first, but after 3 weeks their nightmares began to lessen, and then stop altogether, and they began to get used to their new names. Henry, or Michael as I was now known, managed to open a security and computer services business in the city and, thanks to our new Australian passports, kindly provided by a good friend from America, we were quickly accepted into the local community. Michael Davis was very popular and liked by many local women, both local and expat. But Michael was devoted to his children and hardly dated anyone, practically at all. I left at the age of 29 and am now 37. My name is Michael Davis, formerly Henry Jeffers. I was married to Laura Jeffers, née Swanson. It was 8 years ago, before I left in the middle of the night with my 2 4-year-old daughters, twins Lucy and Jane Jeffers. We attended a small local Catholic church, St. Patrick's, and the pastor, Jesuit Father Armand de Souza, originally from Belgium, became something of a confidant. He listened to my confessions and gave me advice many times. He couldn't justify my actions, but he understood them. When the children were 5 years old, they were enrolled in the local Catholic school, Our Lady of Lourdes, and excelled in their studies. Now they were 12 years old, and the questions began to be asked in earnest. But I digress. It was an innocent question from Lucy that started it all. "Dad, what really happened to Mom? What did she die from?" The kids at school are always asking, and Jane and I don't know what to answer. Jane put down the book in which I thought she was engrossed and stared at me intently. Of course, they were twins. I told the girls that Mom had an accident and died. I was so sad that we left in the middle of the night to start over. Over time, I almost believed it myself. I felt guilty for telling the children this story. I did this to avoid the horror of losing my children to this bitch. But my deception came back to me like a boomerang. I looked at both of them. It's time to decide whether to tell the truth or continue to develop the lie I started that night 8 years ago. But I was too cowardly, and they were only 12, almost 13 years old. How could I explain this to them? I needed time to find the right solution. Yes, that's right. I was stalling for time, but I needed to fix the situation. "Wait a minute," I said. I got up and went to my room to get a photo of their mother. I returned to the living room and sat them down next to me. I showed them her photo. "Your mother came home one day and gave me an ultimatum. She said she needed more physical intimacy than I could give her. She was going to date and sleep with other men, but we still had to stay married. She said that if I divorce her, she will take you away from me and I will never see you again. She said that this is how the world should work, that women should be in charge in a marriage or relationship, and that she will now be the decision maker." I didn't know any other way to tell them. I am not a psychiatrist or a child psychologist, but the lies had to stop. One way or another, I had to confess. I also felt that he had let his children down, thanks in no small part to my cheating partner to my wife, but still to me. But now they know. Their father stole them and left in the middle of the night. What will they think? What would they like? I prepared for the end of my life. Lucy sat with her eyes as big as saucers. Janie just looked at me, then at her sister. Lucy looked at her mother's photo, then back at her sister, and then back at me. Why didn't you call your grandparents? They could have helped us. They could have yelled at Mom and told her that this was wrong. Janie spoke for the first time. Your grandparents didn't like you, did they? Stunned is an understatement. I stared at my daughter with bulging eyes. What should I do now? How did she know? I stuttered, then took a deep breath. No, they didn't. I don't know how they feel now, but they didn't do it. This was something I needed to check out. I actually had no idea how things were in the world. I guess I'll have to check that out too. My daughters sat and looked at a photograph of their mother. Then they looked at me and stared. Then they jumped on me and pushed me back into the chair, hugging and kissing me. Please don't cry, Daddy, Lucy said. And don't even think about leaving us. We love you, always loved, and we don't want to lose you. Janie sobbed quietly into my shirt. Oh yes, we were so afraid that you did something to Mom and you would be taken away from us. We were so afraid. But now we need the whole story. You owe us. They were adamant. And these two were only 12 years old. And now they made their father cry too. Okay, I'll tell you everything I can. But then again, you're 12 years old, and there are some things I don't want you to know. You already know more than I was going to tell you. Dad, there is the internet. What do you think? We won't understand and find out. Stinkers. Janie sang, so what you're saying is that our mother was a cheater and didn't respect you and your marriage. Basically, she was a bad person, and my grandparents were jerks, for some reason. What else, huh? Damn it, wasn't that enough? Well, she was going to do whatever she wanted and sleep with whoever she wanted, and there was nothing I could do about it. But I had to stay and earn money for her to spend and take care of the house, yard, car, and you too. Or else. Or what else, said Lucy. She will divorce me, take you too, and I will work to give her money. She'll have a home, and she'll make sure I never see you again. I couldn't live with it. I couldn't make the right decision, but as far as I could see, it was my only decision. I tried to call your grandparents, but she left on the first night of her first date. Turns out your grandmother made her think that way and do what she did. Your grandfather was too cowardly to protest. He was what she wanted me to become. I looked at the floor in embarrassment. Time for a turning point. I took another deep breath and stood up. Wait here. I went to my room and came back with my laptop. 8 years ago, I recorded that night. I uploaded it to the cloud and then downloaded it to my laptop. I listened to it many times, wondering if I had heard wrong, looking for something else I could do. I found nothing but divorce. But the girls never heard this. They only had my word against their mother's known statements. Their eyes were huge when I began the fateful night conversation. They sat and listened, stunned by the words of a woman they did not remember. Their eyes widened, tears flowed, and then hardened as the bitch tore my heart out. In fact, thanks to my foresight, it was just a small operation. I was already ready for her betrayal. I still wasn't sure we could handle it. But my daughters clearly turned out to be more resilient than I expected. It was so quiet. I raised my eyes and looked at the girls. They looked at each other, and you could almost see the connection between their gazes. Then Lucy turned and smiled, with tears in her eyes. Do you know Abigail Smith, the girl from school? The one who always stays close to us because her parents are never with her? And Naomi Okala, the girl from Okinawa. Her mother is never at school, and her father is always sad. Dad, we don't want this fate for us. They both think you're wonderful, a super dad. But we know better, Dad, Jane said. She giggled. We know that you are just our dad, and we wouldn't want it to be any other way. The hugs and kisses continued, and there were more laughter and smiles than tears. I felt much better. We'll talk more whenever you want. But please don't tell anyone about this. Keep it a secret, okay? Okay, Dad. We can handle it, Dad, Lucy said. We love you, Dad, Jane added. The next day was Wednesday, and on Wednesdays we had football practice. When the girls first came home and said they wanted to try out for the soccer team, I almost became hysterical, stating categorically that this would not happen. It's too dangerous. I didn't even know they played football in Thailand. The girls were confused and looked at each other, then looked at me, and then they both burst out laughing. My stupidity quotient went up 3 levels when they simultaneously said, "Football, Dad." Oh, that's all I could say. So they tried out for the team and both made the cut. They didn't play much that first year, but they were pretty good, and they loved it. Every year they got better. They were now 12 years old, in 7th grade, and starting to grow up. Have you started? Hell, they were already older than me. I sat in the stands and watched the game with Father Armand. He loved watching children play because he missed playing in Belgium. He was a little chubby, so watching was his only activity. And sitting at a game after work gave him an excuse to drink his weekly glass of Foster's ale. I drank Coca-Cola because I was driving. Lucy caught a pass from a teammate and stormed down the field. She saw the defender heading towards her, made a beautiful fake pass, and turned towards the goal. The feint was so good that her legs went one way and her upper body continued moving towards the goal. She fell into a heap, and when she tried to get up, she screamed. Her left leg refused to work, and she could not get up. The whistles blew, the girls screamed, and Lucy's father was already climbing over the low fence and running towards her. Oh wait, it's me. Yes, the leg was broken. Her trainer and doctors fussed around her, and I was out of breath. At that moment, Jane looked at me and said in a concerned voice, "Dad, breathe. It's just a broken leg." Between moans, Lucy hissed to her sister, "Yes, but this is not your broken leg. Sisters, right?" An ambulance arrived, and she was taken to the hospital. I was driving right behind them and was directed there to fill out insurance and consent forms, just like in the States. After some time, my life changed dramatically. Jane came out to sit with me, reassuring me that everything would be okay while I waited to see Lucy again, and that Lucy would be the heroine of the class with her cast. Great, now every hormonal boy within a 50-mile radius will. Wow, I'm trying to find the best description. Wait, I came up with an idea. Oh wow, yes, that's better. I looked up at the petite black-haired woman walking towards us. Her hair was pulled back into a bun, but if I know anything about fashion, it went down to her trim ass. Of course, she was only about 5'2" tall, so they might not have been that long. But she was very beautiful. No, even so, she was amazing. High cheekbones, deep-set green eyes, full lips, all in perfect symmetry with her round face. Firm breasts, not too big. Hey, God doesn't create junk, but I might as well take a look. She moved with a graceful gait, checking her tablet and lifting her head to look around. Her eyes noticed us, and her face lit up. If it was possible, she became even more beautiful. "Monsieur Davis, I'm Dr. Yvette Damond. I was taking care of your daughter, She checked her tablet again. Yes, Lucy. She'll be fine, monsieur. A little sleepy for a while, but that's to be expected. The cast will need to stay in place for at least a month or two, and we'll want to see her again." She looked me up and down. She insisted that I look at her again, so I guess we'll see you again too. The smile said that I was being set up. Jane nudged me. "Say thank you, Dad." "Thanks, Dad," I muttered. "No, wait, did I really say that?" Jane rolled her eyes and laughed. "Oh yes, Jane, your sister said your dad might need some supervision." She laughed. Once again, I was treated like a prize bull. She handed me a business card. "If you need any further help," and her eyes narrowed, "feel free to contact me, for any reason." It's good that I can control myself. Jane could hardly contain her laughter, and meanwhile Lucy was wheeled out in a wheelchair. The smile on her face was probably due to the painkillers and the extreme anxiety her father was going through. Jane ran up to her sister and told me to go get the car. Dr. Damond extended her hand, said, "A shant, Monsieur Davis," turned to Lucy and Jane, winked and said to take care of each other and your father, and throwing on white sneakers, swayed her hips, walked away. And how she left, We pulled out to my Land Rover, and I helped my sick daughter into the car. We drove home, where Arun and Lamai met us. They fussed over my girls and helped Lucy to her bedroom. That's when the hunt began. I mean, the girls have almost fully begun to explore our old family. I got Lucy a wheelchair and crutches, and, with Jane's help, we trained her to learn how to use them. Then I bought her an electric wheelchair, and voila, she became a mobile terror. She returned to school and did well. Meanwhile, I asked my technicians to install internet and wireless connections in their bedrooms. The search began in earnest. The girls were given access to the recordings I made of my loving wife talking about the future of our marriage, and I allowed them to draw their own conclusions. The findings were disappointing. Clinic visits also began, and Dr. Damond became a part of our lives, especially mine. She was a widow. Her husband, also a doctor, died in a boating accident 6 years ago. They worked for the French branch of Doctors Without Borders in Cambodia. She had family in France, but decided she liked the Far East, so she took up a hospital position in Thailand, and here we are. She was 35 years old, had no children, and was looking for a suitable partner. She told me that she had several friends with benefits, as the Americans say. After all, monsieur, I'm French, she said calmly. She then informed me that her days of searching were over. She handed me a certificate from the hospital stating that she was healthy and clean. Then she said that now we are exclusively for each other, if I don't mind. But it seems to me that you feel the same as I do, monsieur, and I feel like you are the one. As she later admitted to me, she felt that her search was over when she met me, but she wanted to make sure. The girls were delighted, saying things like, "It took you long enough, Dad," and finally. 6 years have passed. After the casts were removed, the girls returned to their normal lives, excelling in school and on the soccer field, and enjoying their time with Dr. Damond, or as they jokingly called her, Dad's hot French girlfriend. We went to a few school events, and the doctor got a lot of looks. But she didn't care. We were for each other, and only each other. After a Christmas party at the hospital, when a couple of her male colleagues tried to hit on her and were rejected, we became a couple. She moved in with me, and the girls immediately took to her. She took them under her wing, and they began to share their mother's exploits with her. She and I, also talked for a long time, and I told the whole story. The IRS found Laura's secret deposit, and she was facing jail time. I contacted my friend Mark, who had organized my elopement, and he sent several photographs and letters to Laura showing our life in the tropics. Nothing to indicate the location, just to get on her nerves. She apparently became enraged and was hospitalized and sedated, according to Facebook posts. She had a government attorney who made a deal with the IRS, and she lost all the money in exchange for not being charged. I don't know how she paid her, but I can guess. The girls had reached 18 and were thinking about college. They wanted to travel first, so the good doctor suggested we go to France to meet her family. We were very much in love, and I was going to propose. We could make this a combined vacation and honeymoon, mon cher, she said, raising her eyebrows. If I wait for you to propose, I'll be a wizened, retired old lady. Wow, looks like I'm getting married. At least I shouldn't. And if I wait any longer, my clothes won't fit me anymore, she added, giggling. When I suggested asking my daughters what they thought about it, she grinned. She called them from the pool and told them we were going to France after school with their new little brother. She grinned the whole time while saying this. The girls were delighted. He said yes, they shouted, hugging each other. They then hugged Dr. Damond. Then they attacked me. "Oh, Mom, we're so happy for you too," Lucy said. Then they looked at me. "Finally, Dad," they exclaimed in unison. So it was decided that we would go to France, relax, and they would look after their little brother while we, discussed world events. But how did you find out the gender? I'm a doctor, Sherry. I ran all possible tests, and the boy is completely healthy. In about 5.5 months. This puts his birthday around mid-March. Then 5 months until August, and we can go sightseeing. Then we can go to California and put an end to this show. If you have applied to the Australian embassy, I am almost certain that you can get diplomatic immunity from them because of the secret nature of some of your recent assignments. Then she will be able to show off, as you Americans say. The girl will be able to close the gestalt, and you will be able to be proud of your new wife and child. What do you think, my love? Oh, by the way, stunned is not the right word. I wasn't sure I had anything to say about this. Not that I would change anything, but it would be nice if you asked me. Seems my life was planned by the three women I love most. I told Yvette about our situation a long time ago. At first, she was shocked about my wife's actions. Then the typical European attitude took over, and she was outraged that Laura could treat me like that. I suppose it could have been worse. Yes, she knew everything, based on the girls and their dossiers on the scoundrel. I still don't have anything good to say about my ex-wife, but that was until the way my daughters treated her. Here's what we did. Ignoring the growing bump, Father Armand united us in holy matrimony. He heard my confession quite a long time ago, when the girls first started asking questions. He heard this again, sighed, and then absolved me of all the new sins I had committed, but warned me that in order to make my conscience clear and clear, I must make some kind of reparation or reparation. Otherwise, he was worried about how it would affect my soul. Girls began applying to colleges. Lucy interviewed with Stanford and Janie interviewed with UCLA. Yvette had had quite a stressful labor, and given that she was almost 40, she suggested, and we decided that she should have her tubes tied. After surgery, a blood clot developed, and she was rushed back to the operating room. They treated her, fixed her, and she spent 3 days in intensive care and another 10 in the hospital. When she was discharged, the crowd of well-wishers was huge for such a small hospital. She was very popular. She and the child. To me? Well, I was there. We recuperated at home, lounging on the beach and soaking up the sun. The baby grew and blossomed. Mom recovered and looked better and better every day. She could wear a bikini, and in Thailand she loved to go topless. I went to the Australian consulate and spoke to their CIA version, Jack Woods. I did some work for him and the Australians over the years, nothing James Bond type, just hacking really. But he liked me. We went to a local bar, and the discussion was very enlightening. So Michael, or should I call you Henry? Oh shit, I'm confused, Jack. My name is Michael. Michael Davis, from Queensland. Yes, well, now you are, in the eyes of the Australian government. But we knew who you were since you showed up in Thailand. Your friend received your identities from our government before you left America. We have known about you since your arrival. We knew your history, and the higher-ups, as they say, thought you could be useful, and Mark vouched for you, so we watched you, protected you, and helped you. We turned to you for a little favor, and you, as they say, helped us. So what do you want from the government? Fine. The conversation continued, but Jack Woods found it difficult not to laugh at my stunning reaction to new facts in my life. I told him what we wanted to do and why. Don't worry, Michael. Canberra has your back. You will be an agent of the Australian State Department living in Thailand. This should protect you, but I would advise against getting involved with your ex-wife. Girls, no. Problem. They are 18 years old, Australian citizens, and of legal age. Your wife is a dual citizen due to her French heritage, and your marriage to you was legal because she filed for an annulment, legally, so go back to America and sort the situation out. We will keep an eye on you. I shook his hand, got up, and left. Next stop, Paris, France. I booked Air France tickets for 4 adults, first class, and 1 child to Charles de Gaulle Airport. 20 hours in the air, give or take, non-stop. At least travel companions would be nice. We left and arrived in France a day later, exhausted and jet-lagged. But as soon as I stepped off the plane, my wife, daughters, and son were awakened and rejuvenated by the presence of their family. My new mother-in-law, father-in-law, new son-in-law, and 2 new daughters-in-law were waiting with signs and balloons. Her father-in-law was a lawyer, her mother-in-law was a pediatric surgeon, and her brother was a French short. Her sisters were certified teachers, but none of her siblings were married or had children. So Yvette is now baby hash one, having given birth to 3 grandchildren. The welcome was wild and exuberant for everyone. Then I was introduced, and you could hear crickets. Yvette's mother looked at me with a grateful look, as did her 2 sisters. Her brother stood stone-faced and assessed me. But it was her father. The look I received was piercing and cold. I believe this is the term, the walking dead. I stood there holding my son in my arms. He came up to me, and I stayed where I was. I swallowed hard and was about to wet myself when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed an expression of joy on my new wife's face, which was quickly hidden by a non-committal frown. Again in sandbags. I turned back to the gentleman who looked like an aristocrat. "Hi, Dad," I said. He frowned. Oh. Then he spoke. "So, monsieur, you are the man who seduced my Yvette." Then his gaze shifted to our son. His gaze softened into a wide smile. "And I take it this is my petit-fils." Little Mitchell Jacques Richard Davis took over. He began to chuckle, reached out and grabbed the respected man's mustache. Grandpa Damon's eyes widened. He laughed and snatched little Mike from my arms. "I must say, monsieur, you have excellent taste in wives and children. Welcome to the family, Michael. And you too, Michael," he added to my astonishment. I looked at Grand Damon, beaming, and next to her, my teary-eyed wife and hysterical daughters. Well, I guess I'm okay in their eyes. We arrived at Damon's spacious home and were treated to a fantastic dinner. As jet lag caught up with us, we went to bed. I fell asleep, and the charming French doctor curled up on my chest and hummed quietly to herself. "Oh, good morning, my wonderful husband. Are you busy, mon cher?" she giggled. I grabbed her, picked her up, and had sex with her. She whimpered and collapsed onto my chest. When we had calmed down, I was stroking her beautiful black hair, when suddenly there was a discreet knock on our bedroom door, and the sweet voice of my new mother-in-law announced that, if we were interested, breakfast would be in 10 minutes, almost throwing us both out, red and laughing out of bed. Yvette kissed me and threw me a t-shirt and jeans, saying, "Get dressed, my love, and don't be embarrassed. We are in France, after all." We went downstairs, and there were my daughters, eating croissants and fussing with their brother, while my in-laws laughed. Lucy looked up as we entered the kitchen and grinned. "So, you two solved the world's problems." Jane chimed in. "I heard that the UN wants to hear your thoughts on solving the problem of hunger. I think the rest of the world has already heard them." There was silence, and then the 4 of them burst into laughter. I noticed that my very sophisticated wife was blushing all the way down to the neckline of her blouse. Her ears turned red, and she was very embarrassed. I turned to the table and said, "It was the TV." They laughed even louder, and her parents joined in with equal enthusiasm. Yvette looked at me, and I sat down next to her and took her hand. She turned and looked at everyone else. Sorry for this behavior in the bedroom. I was very excited to be home in my old room with the only man I had ever loved. I don't. Her mother interrupted her. "Sherry, he is your husband. When your little sister finally moved out, I cornered your father, took off all his clothes, and took him upstairs. Now that we are alone, we rarely wear clothes, and we make a lot of noise." "Mammon, that's too much information," Yvette cried, blushing again. Her father was smiling and appeared to be clutching his wife's knee under the table. My daughters were now the ones who were confused. I started to smirk when my wife looked at me and hit me on the shoulder. "It's all your fault. You started this because I love you so much." She could no longer contain her anger and started laughing. She leaned over and kissed me. "You will pay for this again tonight and for the rest of your life." Her father smiled and clapped his hands. Her mother stood up, came over and kissed me. Now I know where her daughter got such talents. Wow, what a kiss. My daughters showed me the class. Our son munched on croissants with jam and paid no attention to anything else. In fact, I should call Lucy and Jane our daughters. They became close with Yvette, even though they had some serious disagreements about how to handle the meeting with their mother. They called Yvette Mom, or Ma, as they called me, Pa, and they loved her immensely. But they had nothing but contempt for Laura. Yvette was a good influence on them. She talked to them about their feelings and how their mother apparently had a lot of problems. She didn't want the girls to become like their biological mother. The girls are almost 19. 15 years have passed since they left her. Girls, your father did what he thought was best. He may have had selfish motives considering the ultimatum your mother gave him, but he did the best he could. At worst, he kept you from becoming like her. At best, he gave you a wonderful life. And if he hadn't done what he did, I wouldn't have you. So weigh all of this before you decide how you will treat her when you meet her. Because there will be a meeting. You must do this. You must leave all these problems in the past, my girls. Otherwise, you are no better than her. And I know that you are better than her. Your father took care of this. At first, they were angry with her, thinking that she was taking their mother's side against their father. But they talked to her about it. They realized she was right. They didn't want to be like their mother. They worried for a long time about what these revelations meant. They reconsidered their plans for meeting Laura, and they realized that Yvette is an order of magnitude better than Laura. As a wedding gift to my wife, I prepared the adoption papers so we could become a complete family. Yvette was shocked when I gave them to her at the rehearsal dinner. She signed them without hesitation. The girls were stunned. They never thought about it. Well, I guess I beat them this time. We visited all the tourist places, the Louvre, the Eiffel Tower, on the left bank of the Seine, Notre Dame Cathedral, and had lunch in street cafes. We even took a trip to the Palace of Versailles, southwest of Paris. We literally forced Grand Pierre and Grand Mire to look after little Michael, and I swear that when we returned 3 days later, he spoke almost fluent French. I was confident that Mikey was in good hands. Besides, these were his grandparents. We stayed in France for almost 4 weeks, and then booked a flight to Los Angeles on Air France. 646 miles, 10 hours 41 minutes flight. Another long flight. The flight passed without incident. Lots of sleep, a forgettable movie, and good French food. After all, it was Air France. We landed in Los Angeles and went through customs. And this is where things started to get interesting. We were greeted by an attractive young woman and 2 serious gentlemen. She introduced herself as Jennifer Torrance from the U.S. State Department. They took us into a side room, and there were 2 men sitting there waiting. As soon as we entered, the men stood up and extended their hands to me. They introduced themselves as Alex McCord and James Lawson. They were from the Australian consulate. Jack Wood says, "Hi, Mr. Davis. He asked us to help you. We've already checked out your Malibu rental and talked to admissions officials at Stanford and UCLA. They are waiting for you there. The rest of your visit is in your hands. Jack told us a little about what you're going to do. We'll support you. Just don't do anything stupid, sir." Alex smiled and sat down. He turned the floor over to Jennifer Torrance. "Mr. Davis, you are a very interesting person. Why would a low-profile Australian diplomat be of such interest to the U.S. government? Maybe it's your French wife, or your 3 children." I hesitated for a moment. My daughters held their breath. My wife prayed quietly. I looked at my hands and then looked up and stared at Jennifer. "I don't know why I'm of such interest, Miss Torrance. I am a subject of the sovereign state of Australia and, by implication, of the British Crown. I have no business with the U.S. government. Does this answer your question?" Jennifer Torrance held my gaze a little longer than she should have, and then looked away. She smiled, reached into her large bag, and pulled out a manila envelope, which she handed to me. "This was given to us to give to you by someone from the Department of Justice. They said it was from a lawyer acting on your behalf. I was told to give this to you. I don't have the slightest idea what's inside," she said, continuing to look into my eyes longer than necessary. "But I understand that this is important to you and your true purpose for being here. Hope this helps. And now, as far as I understand, you have a very busy schedule and a busy program. Therefore, the U.S. government will not detain you any longer. Enjoy your stay. Ladies, gentlemen." She stood up, and her 2 companions nodded to everyone present and left. Alex McCord chuckled and looked at me. As they say, you dodged a bullet, Mike. I'll relay the gist of the conversation to Jack and continue to keep you under surveillance. Behave yourself. Gentlemen, he nodded to everyone else. Enjoy your stay here in America. You're welcome, even though I'm Australian. With that, he and James Lawson stood up, shook my hand, smiled at my ladies, tickled little Mike, and walked out. The girls were stunned. They hugged each other and collapsed on their chairs, laughing and crying at the same time. My wife hit me on the shoulder and looked at me with hostility. Never do this again, she scolded me. Then she started crying and grabbed my hands and hugged me. I hugged her and reassured her, and then kissed her cute little nose. Then, in my dumb mode, I said, "But I didn't do anything." She hit me again and started laughing. The girls came over and hugged me, and Mikey started whining. He lacked attention. We collected all our things and all the people and headed to the rental car. We went to Malibu. I rented a beach house for the duration of our stay, and we arrived and settled in. We went on a 3-day trip to UCLA. Jane's interview went well. The soccer coach was impressed with her performance in Thailand. She was offered a partial scholarship and was accepted into the February intake. We then went to Stanford, and 2 days later, after a stellar interview and an introduction to her soccer career, she was offered a full scholarship as long as she could make the team and maintain her grades. There was a little rivalry between the sisters, and we thought competition would be good for them. We then returned to Malibu to sunbathe and prepare for the meeting. The former Mrs. Jeffers has a new job at the Radisson Hotel near Chatsworth, California. She was currently a day manager assistant at an Italian hotel restaurant. You know, that person who greets you and escorts you to your table and then disappears. We booked a table for 3. Then I took the girls and Yvette to a lunch meeting. I pushed little Mike in his folding stroller toward the hotel's main entrance, entered the lobby, and walked toward the bar, where I could see the girls' table in the main room. Laura worked the day shift since she was new and just an administrative assistant. Her shift ended at 14 o'clock. Bless the internet. Hacking the hotel's computer system was a piece of cake for the hardy girls. The reservation was for 1:30 p.m., leaving her half an hour until the end of her shift. This was our window. The reservation was for Tuesday afternoon, a time of low attendance, almost no one. The girls and I arrived at the restaurant, and Lucy, Jane, and I met Laura Swan, aka Laura Jeffers, the girl's biological mother. The years have not been kind to Laura. My husband's ex-wife got older, gained weight, and didn't try very hard to improve her appearance either through makeup or exercise. She looked tired, exhausted, and broken, but she tried to be polite and courteous, probably to impress her clients. The girls were pleasant and showed no acknowledgement or noticeable interest other than to thank her for seeing them off. Laura, in turn, also showed no recognition. We ordered drinks iced tea for the girls, a mimosa for me, and appetizers. Lucy and Jane looked at each other, still in slight shock from meeting their mother. I watched my daughters and tried to understand their mood. The twins were in their communication mode, silently exchanging thoughts. Girls, you need to decide whether you will continue or not. You have less than 10 minutes before her shift is over and she leaves. It's probably now or never, I said. Lucy used the term they started using to make fun of me. Mom, you and Dad have worked so hard to get us to this point. We must do this. Jane agreed. Mom, call her. I was very proud of my adopted daughters. I beckoned to the waitress. She came over and I handed her the envelope. Give this to Miss Laura Jeffers. She is known to you as Laura Swanson. Tell her that her daughters Lily and Riley want to see her. Now. The waitress froze and was almost speechless. Faster, honey. Now, before she goes, I said in my stern motherly and doctoral tone. She hurriedly walked away and walked to the reception desk, just as Laura was about to take her purse and leave. She told Laura what the woman had said and gave her the note. Laura, with trembling hands, opened it and read it. Mrs. Swanson, or rather the former Mrs. Jeffers. Lily and Riley Jeffers ask that you be honored by your presence at our table to close our connection with you. Come if you wish. If you don't come, it will only confirm our opinion of you. Your former daughters. There was no anger or cursing. In the first 10 or so versions of the letter, things were completely different. But calmer heads prevailed, and the three ladies settled on the final formulation. The waitress passed the message, and Laura took it, getting ready to go home. She read the letter 3 times, whispering, "No, no, this can't be. This can't be." She looked up and looked around, noticing the table the waitress had pointed to and seeing 2 beautiful young teenage girls looking at her, waiting to see if she would come or go. She panicked when she also noticed the striking black-haired woman sitting with them. She almost fainted, but knew she had to find out. She grabbed her purse and stumbled towards the table. I saw her reaction and waited for her decision. I saw her grab her purse and went to our table. "Lord, please let everything go well," I quietly prayed. Laura walked to the table and looked at the 2 young ladies. Lucy sat with her hands on the table, a 3-ring binder next to her right. I sat to her left, calmly sipping an excellent mimosa. To my left stood Janie, seething. Laura stopped and stared at the girls, absent-mindedly ignoring me. "Who are you? Who are you?" she screamed. Janie spoke first. She fixed Laura with a contemptuous look, and the icy tone of her voice was terrifying for such a young woman. This went on for a long time, moving over the years from sadness and grief to disgust and hatred. This was going to be decided. "Please sit down, Miss Swanson." Laura sank into the chair opposite. Janie continued, "My name is Janie Davis. You once knew me as Riley Jeffers, but you didn't really care. You killed our father Henry. Your attitude and complete disrespect, not to mention your threats, made him leave." Lucy picked up the story. "I was once called Lily Jeffers. Remember me, Mom? My name is Lucy Davis now. Did you ever love our father, or was it just a convenient way to get him to submit to your demands as a prostitute? I find it hard to believe that you attach any importance to your supposed wedding vows." Laura was breathing heavily and struggling to remain conscious. She also took the risk of bringing her own lunch. It happened so quickly, she wasn't ready for this. She tried to focus on the 2 girls, her children. I calmly watched her, at least through her eyes. My mind was racing in circles, praying that my daughters would get through this with minimal mental damage. My subconscious went through every prayer I could think of, and even made up a few, hoping God would pay attention to me. Lucy reached for the folder and calmly opened it. "This is the story of your life, Laura, or at least the highlights of the last 12 years. Oh yes, we have been following you for the last almost 7 years, ever since we forced our father to explain to us what happened. We heard recordings of your ultimatum, your reasons that your mother, Laura, instilled in you is not good. What are you doing now? 45, 50 years old?" Absent-mindedly, Laura muttered, 39. Jenny Riley attacked her. "Wow, Mom, you sure have not aged very well. I almost thought you were our useless grandmother. By the way, we have real grandparents in France, and 2 of the best, most adoring people in the world who loved us and cared for us. For us, over the past almost 14 years, they are closer to our grandparents than our blood relatives could ever be. This is our real mother." She pointed at me. "Laura, meet Dr. Yvette Davis. Ma, this is our incubator, the womb that carried us for 9 months, gave birth to us, and then used us as a bargaining chip to force our father to submit to her debauched lifestyle. This is the woman who killed our father and destroyed our family." When she spoke, her voice rose and began to sound. This creature was more concerned about its sexual lifestyle than about our well-being. This. "Okay, Sherry, that's enough. Calm down. I'm sure she understands you." I looked at my enemy, the woman who had broken Michael, albeit briefly, and then tossed him aside. Luckily for my girls and me, it was a short-term shock that he survived. I thanked God again for being there to take him and help make him healthy again. But most of his salvation was due to the 2 young girls sitting next to me. "Miss Swanson, my daughters have been waiting for this for a long time." I'm not a psychiatrist, and I was worried that this meeting would scar them forever. So I'm not going to let them get too far. But I'm not going to let them go too far. I also feel like they need it. You, on the other hand, deserve it for what you have done. Ladies, continue. Lucilla continued. I am a more reserved daughter. Janny Riley is more emotional. However, understand that I don't like you as much as I like her. So this folder records your many meetings that are in the public domain. She opened the cover, began to turn the pages, and seemed to be scanning the contents. In fact, she and her sister remembered almost everything. It was for Laura's benefit. Let's see, I counted 12 cases of sexually transmitted diseases that must be reported to the state of California. That's all we can document. God knows how many more there were. Then there are 5 abortions recorded by medical institutions and insurance claims. HIPAA doesn't care about payouts, only whoever finds out about what you did. Not exactly a flawless recommendation for Mother of the Year, is it? But then again, you weren't worried about anything like that, were you? Janny Riley sang, a real shining example. I'm so glad we weren't there for them. Lucilla continued with a grin. She turned the page and said, Oh, now we come to your criminal record. Let's see, credit card fraud, shoplifting, theft of services. Laura shook herself and seemed to regain some presence of mind as she said, I was a beggar. Your father took you and all my money and bankrupted my parents, leaving me with bills, a mortgage, no money, and no children. I was desperate. Lucilla said, Oh yes, our beloved grandparents. The ones who more or less told our father to suck it up and stick to the game because that's how it had to be in the new world. Are these the ones we're talking about? Because I really have nothing to say about them. Janny Riley added, When we first heard this story at age 12, we were amazed. At first, we didn't believe it. How could they do this? We asked our father why he didn't call our parents and tell them what you did. He said he did. That's when we heard the whole story, and we had our first difficult twin moment. I looked at my sister, she looked at me, and we just knew, that this was ours. Grandparents hated our father. We turned to him and said, They hated you, didn't they, did they? He was stunned. He couldn't understand how 2 4-year-old children knew about it. But we knew, Mom. By this point, the cheap makeup she was wearing had turned into a clown mask covering her sagging face. But she was determined to salvage something from this interaction. You have no idea what a woman has to put up with in this world. You are just children. I looked out for our interests and tried to get your father to behave as a man should, submitting to the will of a woman, and all he had to do was behave himself, learn his place, and serve me as I expected. The woman was now ranting in complete feminist fashion, and the girls were almost shocked. In fact, they boiled and exploded on Laura. The woman was in full feminist rage, and the girls were almost dumbfounded. In fact, they were seething with rage and exploded at Laura. Lucy looked at her birth mother with sadness in her eyes. She almost cried. Laura, you're so damn delusional, it's pathetic. You were married to a wonderful man who worked his ass off for you, bitch. And then you started acting like a bitch and threatened him with losing his wife, marriage, and children in order to become a sex star. You disgust me. Jane was even more harsh. You, Laura, were the reason we were taken away in the middle of the night. You broke our father and forced him to act. It wasn't the best action, but it was the only possible one. He blamed himself for years and never thought he did the right thing. He did the right thing, bitch. He saved us. And while saving us, he spent more than 7 years in self-accusation, remorse, and absolute agony. I hate you so much. Yvette intervened again. Laura was sobbing, curled up into a ball. The waitress approached the table several times, but Yvette waved her away. Okay, girls, I think you've expressed your point of view clearly enough. I think Miss Swanson perfectly understood your opinion of her and her actions. Have you done enough yet? Just a little more, Mom. I think Laura needs to know that we know about her financial misdeeds. Laura turned pale and trembled again. What could they know? Flashed through her head. Lucy continued. Who do you think reported to the tax office about your small bank account? What about that drug money we found? Are you really that stupid? Laura knew her life was over. It turned out that the girls discovered her connection with bad people from a nightclub, who forced Laura to transport small quantities of illegal substances. They passed this information on to their father, who in turn passed it on to the Australian consulate, and from there it went to the FBI. The U.S. Department of Justice and the state of California were very grateful. It was because of this that the envelopes that were given to me in Los Angeles appeared. They talked about dropping the charges against me. I was a free man. Laura will be arrested this evening at her home when her mother brings in the last bank receipts for the traders. At this time, a raid was taking place at the nightclub. Many people were detained, and arrest warrants were issued for those who could not be found. There are many happy law enforcement officers in California. Laura, who was sitting at the table, was killed mentally, and then her world received the final blow. Michael Davis approached the table. Yvette gave me a sign, and I stood up, took my son in the stroller, and headed towards the ladies. I walked over and leaned down to kiss my wife on the cheek. Yvette smiled. Lucy and Jane looked up and smiled. "Hello, Dad. It's good to see you," Lily said. "And here is our brother." "Hello, Mikey," Jane said, tickling him, and he laughed loudly. Then his eyes fell on Laura, and his expression instantly changed to one of fear and panic. He extended his arms to Yvette and began to cry. "Mama, Mama!" Yvette bent down and picked up her son. "Even our brother hates you, although he doesn't know who you are, a witch," Jane said with hatred in her eyes. Lucy summed it up. "Miss Swanson, this meeting was very useful for us, but I think we're done." She turned and looked at her sister. Jane nodded slightly and snorted at the broken woman in front of them. Laura let out a final scream and struggled to her feet. She was broken and destroyed. I felt a little sorry for her, but not much. I know it's cold and cruel, almost like being told that someone will sleep with whoever they want, and the spouse should just accept it, and maybe only occasionally get leftovers and have the right to see their children. I turned to my ex-wife. "Goodbye, Laura. I hope I never see you again in this life. And if I meet you in hell, just ignore me. Please. Let's go, ladies. Let's go back to the house and swim in the pool. Then dinner, and tomorrow it's Disneyland. How do you like it?" The joy was great, and they jumped up like the little children. I will always think of them as chatting, laughing, and fussing with their little brother. Yvette stood up and looked at Laura with regret. "Goodbye, madam. Good luck in your future life. I think you will find it useful. We left to enjoy the rest of our lives." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one. Click to the next one. Click to the next one.